Hello there.
Bro, I just finished it like 10 minutes ago. Everybody owes George Lucas a public apology. I'm not gonna lie, dialogue was a bit poo-poo at times, most of the time, but it's all about the feeling you get, and I got a lot of amazing feelings watching that movie. 10 out of 10, peak of peak, amazing. Yo, my name's Taffy, and like all of you guys, I love entertainment. I mean, that's why you're here, right? To be entertained. My favorite kinds of entertainment usually come from fictional media, and on the 29th of April 2025, I went to see my childhood favorite movie, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, in theaters for the first time. It had come to my attention that the movie was having a 20th anniversary re-release, so I checked my schedule and got myself a ticket during school hours to make sure I could go and watch this movie without any disturbance. Revenge of the Sith was my favorite in the series because it's the tragic tale that revealed Anakin Skywalker's final days as a Jedi and how he lost his way to fear and ultimately hurt all of those around him. Okay, you got me. I liked it as a kid because it had my favorite lightsaber battle and Darth Vader was born. I don't give a damn about character development, dialogue, or acting. I was 9, so I went to see this movie solo in the theaters to figure out whether the hate that this movie had received was actually warranted. And I walked out of that theater feeling 9 years old again. The music, the worlds, Order 66, the Mustafar duel, the birth of Darth Vader scene. Do it! Hello there. All the memes, it was perfect. For the most part, I had a blast watching this movie. The last time I saw that beautiful Star Wars logo enchant my eyes on a cinema screen was... ew. But this time it was magical. If you haven't seen a Star Wars movie in theaters before, I highly recommend putting that in your top 10 to do before you die list. Thank me later. But although I was engulfed with nostalgia and laughed at certain serious scenes because of the stupid memes that came from them, I had to keep it a bean. My inner video essayist kept chiming in at certain parts to ruin the experience for me, and the cardboard man mainly would keep saying, why am I not entirely convinced by Anakin's turn to the dark side? Now, this wasn't the worst part of the movie for me. It was the shoddy dialogue and certain scenes with stiff acting that mainly stuck out. But that single question has been on my mind non-stop for a while now. It caused a knock-on effect where I then restlessly pondered why other fictional characters I admire would turn heel without a convincing reason, performance, or much time to develop these desires to turn them to the other side. Why didn't I find this turn to evil so convincing? But why did I find others convincing? Is there a concrete solution to this? Is it the fault of the writer or the fault of the direction, editing, pacing, and acting? Let's discuss that, shall we? Also, I'm going to refer to characters turning evil as heel turns throughout the video because I really like pro wrestling terminology. Also, massive spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen the stories I'm about to cover, so be warned. A popular aspect of writing engaging stories is that there has to be a journey of some sort that the characters have to endure. Whilst this can be a physical journey or adventure, I think the most important journey that a story can have is the personal journey that the characters go through, whether it's character growth, redemption, coming of age, or in the case of this video, regression. What must take place in a character's personal journey that will cause them to lose sight of themselves, their morals, and follow a path of self-destruction and pain? But most importantly, how can the writers execute and portray these events in a believable manner? There are a plethora of ways to fail at this because writing character development is tedious and takes delicate time and care. So, if there is enough foreshadowing, I won't buy it. If the performance isn't strong enough, I won't buy it. If the dialogue is too on the nose or lacks good enough subtext, it ruins immersion and I won't buy it. And if the heel turn isn't paced well or is too rushed, I won't buy it. To be completely honest, you don't need all of these things combined to write a good heel turn. With the right care, it could take a small selection of these traits to write a character's turn to the dark side that will stick with people for generations. So with these traits being established, I'm going to look at the cases of Anakin Skywalker in the Star Wars prequels and Jimmy McGill in Better Call Saul Season 1.
Anakin, Chancellor Palpatine is evil! From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
I'm going to have to high security after claiming that Anakin Skywalker's turn to evil isn't good, because not only is the Star Wars franchise undergoing another big new wave of popularity due to Andor Season 2 being released at the time rewriting the script, but also due to the 20th anniversary re-release of Revenge of the Sith, allowing for everybody to look back at the prequel era and their love for it. Also, I'm strictly talking about the prequel movies, not the Clone Wars show or the comics, since TCW came out like 3 years after the prequel trilogy and has a lot of contradictions that don't line up with episode 3. And also I want to look at how George Lucas as the writer-director and his team specifically handled this character turn. But to be honest, I actually didn't have too many issues with Revenge of the Sith on its own. It was mainly Attack of the Clones, which was there to lay down a lot of foundation and foreshadowing. A big issue I had with the prequels was that its dialogue was doo-doo garbage. The conversations between characters in episode 2 and 3 don't have much personality in them and are essentially just exposition dumps. There are rarely any conversations between characters that are just simple conversations to present their dynamics or chemistry. They almost always talk about something that happened off-screen that the audience requires context for, like in the elevator scene that introduces Anakin and Obi-Wan. And subtext? Never heard of her. These characters will always express themselves with poor on-the-nose dialogue. Now, an argument could be made that Star Wars directly opposes subtlety, as it's a massive operatic opus that has melodramatic music, scenery, characters, and worlds. But the dialogue being so unnatural doesn't aid these factors, but drags you out of the immersion. There's a difference between this.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
And this.
You're on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What? How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
Furthermore, the acting was stiff on several accounts, which was very apparent upon my rewatches of this movie. Although Hayden Christensen received a lot of slack over the years for his performance, I thought that he didn't do a half-bad job for the most part. Lots of people criticized him for his delivery being pretty robotic, and whilst I agree there are a good amount of scenes where he and other castmates look like they're racking their brains to remember the lines, at times I found his performance to be pretty moving. I loved Hayden's scenes where he was just silent, especially in Revenge of the Sith. I've seen some side-by-side shots where he literally mirrors Luke, and it's beautiful. But whenever he or anybody else opens their mouths in this movie, it's either pure comedy or horror. We've been given light, and I mean very light, exposition on Anakin and Chancellor Palpatine's mentor-mentee relationship. But it's pretty difficult for me to buy personally, because we never get to see it until the last movie. Anakin talks about how much he respects Palpatine in Attack of the Clones, and the timeline could give us a reason to believe that Anakin was able to garner a pretty close relationship with Palpatine, as the prequels span over a decade of time. But talk is cheap. If you hadn't watched or read any extra media, all this talking doesn't do the job of giving us believable plausibility as to why Anakin would be so sure to defend him rather than listen to Obi-Wan, who Anakin literally reminds us is a father figure to him in Attack of the Clones. I personally would have preferred if the 3-year gap between episodes 2 and 3 were extended to maybe 6 or 7 years to give a little more maturity to Anakin, so him building such strong ideals against the Jedi's way of navigating the war and the suffering throughout the galaxy could feel more developed. Another issue is that Anakin's main motivation for joining Palpatine is to save his wife Padme. He dreams of Padme dying at childbirth, similar to his previous dream that foresaw his mother's death. Although Anakin's desperation to save his wife from dying is believable, especially after his previous experiences with the death of his mother, the movie doesn't give us much of a deep connection between Anakin and Padme. Padme rarely shows up, and when she does, she's almost a completely different character from the previous 2 films, as she seems to be pretty detached from politics other than one scene. She just sits around waiting for Anakin, and they pretty much say "I love you so much," hug, then go on to talk about political matters we already know of, and that's it. At least in Attack of the Clones, the two of them share a few conversations about their feelings and get to know each other a little more after being separated for so long. But even then, the way how she devotes her life to him at the end of the movie is kinda crazy. So does their love feel pretty rushed? Yeah. Also, it feels like he didn't make any proper attempts to find a way to prevent Padme from dying, other than his quick chat with Yoda, which he didn't include many details of his issue, leading to answers that don't help his situation, even though it's inferred that Yoda could possibly see through Anakin's intentions here. Palpatine tells stories of the Sith being able to prevent death, specifically his previous master, Darth Plagueis, and Anakin kinda just buys it. But once Palpatine reveals himself to be a Sith Lord, and we get through the scene where Anakin betrays Mace Windu and pledges himself to Palpatine, the logic train just gets hurled out the window alongside Mace Windu. When Palpatine asks Anakin to join him, he doesn't say that he definitely can save Padme. He tells Anakin that he doesn't know how yet, but together they'll find out a way how. And after hearing that, not only does Anakin officially pledge himself to a Sith Lord, who just slimed out 4 Jedi Masters, but Anakin then kills all the younglings in the temple, which is an insane jump. Not only is the foreshadowing of Anakin's distrust and the rebellion against the Jedi quite lacking, but his going to the extreme of killing innocent children with his own blade, based on a maybe, is something I just can't fully buy. I mean, Anakin went out of his way to risk lives for clones in the beginning of the movie, and a lot of the time the Jedis treat clones like they're kind of disposable in these films, so I don't see him bringing himself to do such a thing. A YouTuber I watched called Sheev Talks released his analysis on Revenge of the Sith around the time of writing this script, and he pointed out something that I really want to mention. He pointed out that a way to really try and sell Anakin's turn to the dark side could have been to put more emphasis on Anakin's strained relationship with the Jedi and his political standings, such as how the novel adaptation of the movie did. He also talks about how Anakin could potentially feel animosity towards the Jedi after his mother died due to their absence in the worlds where slavery still exists, such as Tatooine. And whilst I get it makes a lot of sense for Anakin to want to save his dying wife, especially after what he vowed after his mother died. But without actually developing their love and making it feel so rushed, it's just a massive jump of ideals. At least they have this scene of him wrestling with the decision he's about to make, which ended up being one of my favorite shots in the entire Star Wars franchise. When looking back, Anakin's journey to becoming Darth Vader and the events that led to the Empire's birth were pretty much the big selling points of the prequel trilogy. And in the prequels, I felt Anakin's turn to the dark side felt rushed and underbaked. And we only see the very start and the end of the Clone Wars, probably because it was only mentioned passingly one single time in A New Hope. Due to most of the kids like me who grew up with the prequels being young adults now, they can voice their opinions on these movies. The new outlook on these films tend to highly favor Anakin's story the most, but when looking at the writing of this heel turn from a critical standpoint, it falls short of most other heel turns that you'll find in fiction. I'm a big prequel fanboy. The intro of this video was basically an excuse for me to express my joy that I felt watching Revenge of the Sith in theaters for the first time. I'll admit it. Order 66 still gives me chills to this day, and seeing that in cinemas made me feel like not only a little kid again, but it made me feel like a grown-up. Because for the first time, I actually had clarity at what was going on in the story, and I wasn't just there to see lightsaber fights. Anakin killing the younglings was heartbreaking, and I don't think I'll forget the shots of him marching through the temple with the clones, especially with the masterclass of a score that was playing to raise the emotion of the scene. But when trying to assess good character arcs and changes in ideology, this one shouldn't be an example of what to do, but an example of the mistakes that you could run into. But you could also look at this as how you could go about fixing these issues as well.
Showtime, folks.
Now, to be fair to Revenge of the Sith, Better Call Saul is a 6-season long series. It took a lot more time to develop characters and relationships and make the audience care about them. So I'm only going to cover Jimmy's character arc in the first season from Better Call Saul. But also because I think that Better Call Saul Season 1 is extremely underrated and has some of the best character writing in the entire show, especially for Jimmy. At the start of Better Call Saul Season 1, the first time we meet Jimmy McGill, he's not really Saul Goodman yet, but at times we see hints of Saul. He's only able to take cheap public defender cases and is struggling to make a name for himself as a lawyer. He still uses his unorthodox showman-style mannerisms whilst defending clients at trials, and we don't really know where Jimmy's at yet in life other than the fact that he's poor. After a pretty humiliating court session, getting underpaid, and then getting pissed off by Mike Ehrmanschau, the parking troll, Jimmy has to essentially fight and beg for the Kettlemans, potential clients who embezzled a fortune of money, whose case could help him out of the state he's currently in and could launch his career. However, the Kettlemans get scooped by Hamlin McGill, the big law firm that is co-owned by Chuck McGill, Jimmy's older, condescending, and mentally ill brother, and Howard Hamlin, the man Jimmy hates most in this world. And HHM happens to be where Kim, his former girlfriend and one of his only real friends left, are employed. And if that wasn't bad enough, Howard wants Jimmy to change the name of his legal practice from James M. McGill, as it would apparently cause confusion with HHM, which is ridiculous in hindsight as Jimmy has nearly no manpower or marketing budget to compete with HHM. It's also laughable and depressing as HHM's headquarters is a massive building with a vast staff of talented attorneys, with Howard at the head of the table, whilst Jimmy both lives and works in a back room of a nail salon. In episode 1, we learn that this story doesn't start with Jimmy being a saint. After a couple of skateboarders try to scam him, Jimmy recruits them to run his own scam on the Kettlemans, and here's when we get some exposition on Jimmy's troubled past life as Slippin' Jimmy. I criticized Star Wars earlier for its exposition dump dialogue, and although in this scene Jimmy is telling the two skateboarders an anecdote about his past life, the reason why it works so well here is because in Breaking Bad, Saul's greatest weapon was his words. He constantly got out of bad situations or persuaded people to do what benefits him by running his mouth. So seeing Jimmy tell the story about himself, telling it in the third person to add more flair, it's like we get to see a small pigeonhole to Saul Goodman, the dark side of him that he's trying to repress. In Jimmy's eyes, the scam would be harmless, since to him, nobody gets hurt, but of course, if you've seen the show already, you would know that that's far from what happens. My favorite aspect from Jimmy's character is his selfishness. We meet Jimmy as he slowly backslides into his old habits after years of being on the right side of the road, and we follow the bumpy path he goes down to becoming the man that works side by side with Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. We get a few flashbacks to see what Jimmy's life was like before the show's main timeline set in 2002. We see him getting bailed out of prison by Chuck, and a scam he runs on some guy from a bar. As Better Call Saul kept developing, there became a clear distinction that the villains are most of the people involved in the cartel, but at the start of the series, the antagonists are Howard Hamlin and Chuck, and it's their interactions with Jimmy that cause him to make worse decisions down the road in retaliation. The second time we see Jimmy deal with a situation that could cause him to further regress into his old ways is when he finds the Kettlemans hiding away, after they were threatened with being robbed for the money they had stolen. They offer Jimmy a hefty bribe to keep him quiet, and although we can see the small internal battle Jimmy has with himself over deciding whether or not he should take it, he folds. But with a plot twist. He tried to counter the offer by proposing that he would take them on as clients, which would make the bribe a retainer fee, but they say,
"You're the kind of lawyer guilty people hire."
And from that moment forward, it only becomes a slow but chaotic regression for Jimmy in this season. He essentially declares war on HHM from this point on, but specifically towards Howard Hamlin. He orchestrates this illustrious and insane scheme to gain publicity for his law firm, whilst doing it at the expense of HHM. And by some strange twist of fate, the Kettlemans end up running back to Jimmy from HHM. Now, I'm guessing you'd think this is where he gives into his greed and capitalizes from this opportunity. Nah, stay with me now. Jimmy goes out of his way to hire Mike to steal money from the Kettlemans' house directly and essentially force them into a corner that leaves them with no choice but to go back to HHM and take a deal with the DA, which would result in some jail time, but ultimately, the sentence would be reasonable and is the best shot Mr. Kettleman has with getting a light sentence. Why would Jimmy do this? For one, it would help Kim get back the clients she needs to get in good books with Howard Hamlin. It's the best solution for the Kettlemans to get out of the stupid mess they'd made, and the money they stole would be returned to the government, rightfully so. For the most part, Jimmy did the right thing here. Furthermore, he literally says it when Mike asks what this was all for. So after all is said and done, why does Jimmy have a meltdown as soon as he gets a moment alone? This whole time, as I've gone over Jimmy's main catalyst for him slipping into bad behavior, the signs all point towards Howard being the bad guy. But this entire time, the person who's been hindering Jimmy's career and indirectly causing him to slip was Chuck. This entire season, Jimmy has been doing whatever he can to make Chuck happy. He's been the one supplying Chuck with all his living materials due to his, complications. When Jimmy did the big billboard stunt, he went out of his way to make sure Chuck didn't see it, as the series makes it apparent that his illness is actually a mental condition that tends to spike whenever Jimmy does anything bad. He always makes it an effort to be the first responder when Chuck's in need or in the hospital. He's there every single day, making his life harder to support Chuck, and Jimmy makes it his first priority to make sure that Chuck's okay. So keeping this in mind, his dream is to not only live up to Chuck's standards, but to be what Chuck once was. Chuck is Jimmy's biggest inspiration. So when Jimmy puts together a case against the nursing home chain for the elderly, he gets the chance to work with Chuck as a lawyer, as a partner. The joy we see in Jimmy in this scene is more real and genuine than any other accolades or achievements that he's accomplished in this show. Sure, the case has potential for becoming a multi-million-dollar federal suit, but that's not why Jimmy is so happy here. It's being able to work with Chuck, seeing Chuck get better and do what he loves again, and finally leave the house, the person he once was. But when the case's scale gets too big for the brothers to handle alone, Chuck urges Jimmy to give the case to HHM. And in the meeting, Hamlin shuts down all possibilities for Jimmy to work on the case with HHM. Jimmy gives Howard a good piece of his mind and tells him to stick it, but when Kim goes to Howard in private to try and vouch for Jimmy, she finds out the truth. But it's so bad that she can't even bring herself to tell him or the audience. So when she does meet him later on, she just tells Jimmy to take the finder's fee that Howard had offered him originally and start something new. So after a night alone, Jimmy starts evaluating the situation and finds out the truth behind it all. Hamlin was never the gatekeeper. It was Chuck. From the day when Jimmy still worked in the HHM mailroom and past the bar, Chuck had Howard deny Jimmy be hired as an attorney. He had Howard be the face of everything Jimmy despised, when it was always him. Not only was Chuck one of the only people Jimmy felt he could rely on, he was Jimmy's hero. And to hear that Chuck deceived and lied to him for years, and that he's essentially had no faith in Jimmy's progression, it nearly breaks him. After the betrayal of Chuck, Jimmy goes back to his hometown of Chicago and links up with his old friend Marco, and relapses pretty hard, running scam after scam after scam. But their final scam together not only ends up with him losing money, but Marco as well, who has a heart attack just before they can scam their final victim. Jimmy was reluctant to do this last hit, which shows he still has some restraint on him and that Chuck's influence is still there in the back of his mind. He returns to Albuquerque after Marco's funeral and finds out that HHM have partnered with another law firm, Davis & Main, who are highly considering hiring Jimmy after learning that he conceptualized and started the case. This leads us to the final scene of season 1, which kinda solidifies Jimmy's turn to the dark side, where going forth he takes more action. Kim lets him know that Davis & Main will be at the local court and advises Jimmy to show up to make a good impression of himself. So he goes there and tries to hype himself up a little before going in, but as he's standing in the parking lot, he clutches onto a ring that Marco left him after his death and hesitates. And after a few seconds, We then cut as he drives back in the opposite direction towards Mike, who's on the job at the parking gate like in episode 1. Jimmy recounts the night where they stole $1.6 million from the Kettlemans, and expresses how easy it would have been to just keep the money amongst themselves and never be found out, especially since the Kettlemans are like the biggest fools on the planet. Mike tells him that he only was there to do the task at hand, and once the job is done, that's it for him, no more strings attached. And Jimmy responds saying,
I know what stopped me. You know what? It's never stopping me again.
And as he drives off, he smirks and starts humming the same song Marco did when they would rip off people in the days of Slipping Jimmy, letting us know that his days of scams and breaking the rules didn't die with Marco, even after they'd led to broken relationships, broken limbs, and even death. Absolute cinema. This is the best way to end the first season. Now, if you've seen the show past this point, you know that Jimmy doesn't instantly become Saul Goodman at the start of season 2, but he does cause a lot of discourse for the people around him as the series goes on, both in the world inside the law and in the criminal underworld. But these events in season 1 are big moments in his life that rebirthed Jimmy down a path of greed and evil, beyond the levels he'd ever been capable of as Slipping Jimmy. Season 1 of Better Call Saul isn't even the start of Jimmy's dark path. He's been influenced by greed and tempted by bad activities from a very young age, stealing from his parents as a child, running scams in Chicago as Slipping Jimmy, but there's a reason why the story starts here, and only shows snippets and anecdotes from Jimmy's days in Chicago. This point in Jimmy's life is where he's reintroduced to the opportunity of bending and breaking the rules of the law for personal gain, but more importantly, revenge. In season 1, most of Jimmy's relapses and schemes are caused by his desire to get back at people who he believed wronged him, particularly Howard Hamlin and HHM. His hatred already ran deep enough for Howard, and the Kettleman's case was the final straw that broke the camel's back. And the events that would follow led to the conception of Saul Goodman. Whilst the name was uttered once in the first season outside of the black and white opening scene, his actions parallel what he becomes. And although I'm extremely thankful that this show got picked up for many seasons after this one, and was able to finish Jimmy McGill's storytelling with pretty much perfect storytelling, performances, cinematography, and payoff, if the show had been as unlucky to only have that one season, it would have told a very good story of events that conceived the Saul Goodman we know and love. Okay, that does it for this video. These are 2 examples of character regressions that had a profound impact on me as a writer. Whilst one is better than the other, I want to put out there that it's fine if you still really like Anakin's downfall in the prequels. How I felt watching the scene where the helmet is put on Anakin for the first time. That scene alone is peak fiction and saves the whole movie for me. Both these stories are heartbreaking. I'd love to hear your thoughts on either one of these heel turns and your own takes on them, okay? Cool. Later, nerds. Subscribe. Hey, I mean it. Subscribe. Okay. That's it. The video's up.